I'm John Atack. It's my pleasure to welcome Karen de la Carriere. Hi, Karen.
Thank you,
Um,
John. Hmm.
we are here to pay tribute to Mike Rinder, our friend Mike Rinder, who has passed away. So you knew Mike for rather longer than I did.
50 years.
Yeah, I only knew him for 30 years. So, you
Mm,
know,
yeah.
uh, and so you met on the Apollo in
Hmm.
1973, if I'm right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was such a young, good-looking boy, and
Mm.
the story was that he kind of got kidnapped there. You have to hand in your passport when you
Yeah.
arrive on a Scientology ship. It's a strange to prevent you blowing, to prevent you running away,
And you leaving, escaping. Yeah.
escaping,
Yeah, I
escaping.
mean,
And
I interviewed him, and there's an interview on the channel where he talks about arriving when he was 18 years old, and
yes.
he was
Yeah.
6 when his parents got into Scientology in Australia,
Yeah.
and he arrived, full of the joys of spring and determined to train into a high management position, only to be told after his passport had been taken away that he'd been swapped, he'd been
Yeah.
exchanged for some courses, so he was
Yeah.
fundamentally sold as a
Yeah.
slave, I think, by the Sydney organization to run Hubbard at the Apollo.
Yeah,
And it,
that's in culture of Scientology. You're treated like
yeah,
like a piece on a chessboard. They even talk about it. What's the trade? If I give you so and so, what's you're traded like a
yeah.
and yeah.
I mean, it's hard to think about, and it took me many years. It was probably when Claire and Mark Headley started saying, we were trafficked as slaves. It's modern
Yes.
slavery. And,
Yeah.
I've seen it all of these years, and you go, that's exactly what it is. And there are still 4,000 slaves in there. And, we have to do what we can to help them escape from it. But
Yes.
so, yeah, um, reflect upon Mike. Tell me some stories about Mike. Let's celebrate his life.
Yes. In the late 1980s, I was summoned to a torture program at the int base. And I appealed to Mike a couple of times. I just begged of him to, I was in propitiation. I promised to clean his room and white glove it to
Mm,
a higher standard. Is there anything he could do to help me see my son?
mm,
Alexander was all alone in Los Angeles. Heber was shipped to Germany because Germany was just raising hell about the cult. So there was no dad, and I was in lockdown at Intbase. And Mike was very strained. You could see he saw, he, but he didn't have the power to overrule David Miscavige. He
mm.
didn't. And I said, well, I'm going to do your room anyway. And I got all the cleaning materials and I white glove. He was married to Kathy Rinder at the time. By the way, I was the auditor selected to audit his ex-wife, Kathy Rinder, when they lost the baby. He lost a child.
That would have been their first child, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
They had
yes,
two more children together after that, I think.
yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
Mike told me that the only reason that he was standing up to Scientology, the only reason, was because he wanted his children to escape from it. And, you and I know from
yeah,
experience the incredible risk he took and the courage it took to do that. But
yeah,
such was, the feeling he had, and that he'd never been allowed to be a parent to them,
mm,
which is absolutely normal, unfortunately, in the slave Sea Org. And so he wanted to, that was all he was focused on. Whenever I spoke to him, we have to bring Scientology down so that my children will be able to escape from it. Bless him.
yeah. It was just abominable that they used Taryn to make hate videos on him. with complete and utter lies
Yes.
of him being a wife beater. They had him as the church spokesman for 20 some years.
Yeah.
They're trying to say that while he was a wife beater, he represented the church on CNN and every network. It was just complete and utter. But to use his beloved child. Now, John, this comes from Hubbard's work. He says, find out what they value the most. This is of an enemy. Find out what they treasure the most. Find out what they love the most and use that as the target. So, of course, his daughter Taryn was dear to his heart. So she was used. But it rolls back to Hubbard's doctrines on how to punish and penalize someone speaking out.
Yeah, how to control people, and that is the heart of Scientology. It was always about controlling people. And, you know, what it promised was that we'd have superpowers, we'd become magicians able to perform magic tricks. And it's incredible, isn't it, looking back, going, well, nobody ever did. And yet the money kept on flowing through. And but yeah, all about control, infinite control, tone 40, you know, getting people to do what you want them to do, whether they agree or not.
Not enforced, yes. So I could not understand why I had such a brutal experience. So I started communicating with Mike Rinder. I was still in the cult, but we would have these 1-hour conversations day after day after day. And Mike, thanks to Mike, he made me see straight. And I credit a lot of my departure and everything I've done subsequently on Mike's coaching. Mike interpreted why I was punished that badly and that viciously. John, I was hauled out of bed at 2 a.m. for sex checks. 2 a.m. My needle must have been jammed, stuck needle. I was hungry, I was sleep deprived, and I was hauled in to be asked, are you here to destroy David Miscavige? Are you here to destroy Scientology? You know,
do you think David Miscavige is paranoid? Yes.
John, I could not have been more loyal at the time. I was a class 12 CS.
Which is the highest level possible in Scientology, and you were one of only 8, I believe.
That's right. That climbed to that level. And at that time, I could not have been more dedicated. I was winning award after award, the $1 Million Girl, the Auditor of the Year, CS of the Year, blah, blah. And these were the questions. Are you planning to go to the IRS? Are you planning to go to the Los Angeles Times? But now I can laugh at it, but it wasn't laughable at 2 a.m.
No, you're being dragged out of bed in the middle of your night. You are the wife of the president of the Church of Scientology at the time, and you're being interrogated with, as you say, a security check attached to the e-meter and asked all of these paranoid questions.
Right. So Mike interpreted why I was there for those many months and what happened, and it was so cathartic to me. Because when you're hung up in mystery, it keeps running like what happened? Why? Yeah. My stats had always been out the roof. And all this punishment was because I said something. I didn't steal someone's husband. I didn't embezzle money. I didn't reveal OT levels to non-OT. I didn't do anything that Scientology would consider.
You were a good girl. What can we say?
John. So thanks to Mike Rinder I have a channel with God knows how many hundreds of thousands of views. I haven't been doing videos lately, but anyway, Mike took the time with me day after day after day to describe what was happening with Heber, what was happening with me. The one thing David Miscavige wanted, and I wasn't just picked on, he did this with many couples. He wanted a divorce. He liked to split up couples. And so Mike Rinder, and there's a huge list of marriages he
in the tradition of L. Ron Hubbard, who devastated marriages. You know, if you look at, say, Yvonne and Peter Gillam,
yes,
and the way that, you know, and he would, you know, when I talked with Janice Gillam about this, the way that Hubbard would make sure that the parents couldn't see the children, make sure that the parents couldn't be together. It's just this small-minded sadism. And, you know, although, of course, David Miscavige usurped Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard did not make him his heir. His heir was Pat Broker, as we know. But nonetheless, he somehow recognized a kindred spirit in David Miscavige, somebody who was equally malevolent, who had no real concern for anybody but himself. And I don't think any belief at all in Scientology. I think he was a cynical, even more cynical about Scientology than Ron Hubbard was. You know, Ron Hubbard knew that it was a control mechanism, that it wasn't liberating anybody from anything, wasn't helping anybody, other than, you know, to get high, which we've talked about before, briefly high, so that you'll pay more money over and become more dedicated, and creating auditing junkies. But Miscavige, you know, the amount of people that I've interviewed over the now 41 years since I left, and, you know, Miscavige, the first I heard of him was when it was John Barnes and Roger Axel, is that right? Roger Barnes and John Axel. Have I got that the right way around?
Yes,
and
right on.
He was ordered to spit on one of them and to slap the other.
Yes.
And that was the first I heard of him. I was still involved in Scientology. I heard that this guy had assaulted people and was boasting about it. And at that point, I went, I'm not sure I really want to be involved with this anymore. I later found out that, in fact, there was an order from Hubbard for him to do that. So he'd just complied with the order, you know.
Yes.
Awful, terrible.
It became in the culture, the spitting on a senior could spit. It was a humiliation tactic.
That's disgusting.
It's just, and it originated with Hubbard sending down an order to, but look at how Hubbard treated Mary Sue Hubbard, talking about marriages split. He just threw her under the bus.
Yeah, I talked with somebody who was involved with censoring letters from her after she came out of prison. She would write to her husband, and she'd gone to prison for him.
Yes.
I was yesterday glancing at an academic book published by the Oxford University Press and edited by James Lewis. And in it, James Lewis talks about several members of the Guardian's office going to prison. He doesn't say 11, he says several. And he doesn't say that Mary Sue Hubbard was one of them. And he doesn't, he says, you know, and then they got rid of the Guardian's office. You go, no, Ron Hubbard was one of 38 unindicted co-conspirators. Yes. And I have orders that he wrote to harass people. So this kind of, oh no, it had nothing, we didn't know that was going on. And the other side of that is, if Ron Hubbard had these superpowers, and one presumes that David Miscavige has them, why didn't they know? You know, the Germans say a fish stinks from the head down. If something's going wrong, look at the top first. So, you know, Hubbard had David Mayo for 25 years next to him and never noticed that he was a suppressive person. It's like, oh yeah, really? It's a racket. What can we say?
Well, Mike Rinder, after leaving with just the shirt on his back and a laptop and penniless, did you know that when one of his first jobs was being a car salesman in Denver, Colorado?
I didn't know about that. No.
Monique Yingling David Miscavige's personal lawyer, was flown out and met him and offered him $5 million. Remember, he was penniless. Used car salesman. It's a commission job. You make money only if you sell a car, And she offered him $5 million hard cash if he would sign away his rights to speak. He could never talk about his history.
Violate the First Amendment to the American Constitution. Yeah.
But he turned it down. He had become already sovereign to his own. He valued it. He knew he had a destiny to reveal it all. And boy, did he. John, I can't, if you've looked at, by the way, you did a beautiful write-up for Tony Ortega on Mike Rinder. That was heartfelt. It was really good. But I wanted to tell you that just look at, I don't know if the public remember what happened when Hubbard died. It was just, no one had one good word to say about him. Newspaper after newspaper, media after media, they called him this and that. And there was just this, he was despised. And look at Mike Rinder's, if you just contrast the hundreds of people that come forward and say, what a great, if you just compare Hubbard's death and the reason that I was at OSA at the time, he was assistant, and I was answering the phone as Media of the World called because Hubbard had just died and they wanted to talk to the president. And they just spat on him as a charlatan and a con. There wasn't one kind word said about him. Just contrast what happened when Mike Rinder died. Just compare that. This is just amazing how he was, because he didn't do everything wrong the way the cult did. Once he moved over to the light side, once he left, that was good.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about the 5 million, and let me say that's the highest amount I've ever heard of Scientology offering. The complete payout to Michael Flynn, who had 25 clients, was 5 million. So that's and wow, that he not only turned that down, which I mean, I might be tempted, they did offer to pay my to buy paintings from me for the rest of my life back in 1994, and I'm afraid I was a bit rude to Greg Ryerson when he offered me that.
Greg Ryerson.
That he had the integrity to turn that down, and it's been so hard to get over to people because as I said in the piece for Tony Ortega, I didn't know what I was getting into. I was a public Scientologist. I had some vague idea that there was a harassment machine in place. But from day one, in October 1983, when I, accidentally hosted the first meeting of disaffected Scientologists, a public meeting, from day one, there were two guys on the door, Mike Garside and Robert Springle, taking our names as we went in. The harassment began immediately. So it built up to the point where within a few weeks, I was really shocked by what was happening, by the campaign against me and against the small group of us who'd left, and left publicly. About half the membership left privately. But that made me more resistant, going, well, no, I'm not going to back down. But looking back, would I have done it if I'd known that I was going to be harassed for 16 years solid? Mike knew exactly what was going to happen to him. And the harassment, I had it was pretty hard at times, but nothing like what happened to Mike, and he flew around all over the country, all over the world, at times at his own expense, to help, particularly the FBI, to try and overturn the IRS ruling, which he'd had something to do with, and to help people, and his work at Child USA, he told me that he was most proud of that there were now, I think, 25 states where the statute of limitations on the abuse of children had been overturned, and that he thought that that was a very worthy thing to have done, and it
Yes.
was. It was. And
You
I
know,
always, sorry, go ahead.
no, he was so courageous, and he became really feisty and spunky when the cult was opening this superpower building with all the they had extorted money for 20 something years for this building.
Mm.
They got I think the building cost something like 160. They had reached double the amount. Just kept raiding people's bank accounts for this superpower, which was supposed to change the civilization.
Well, what was promised with it? Let me tell you a story
Right.
about that. What was
Yeah.
promised with superpower was, and it's the only thing that's been added to the bridge since Hubbard died, apart from OT8, which he did construct. I don't think he had anything to do with superpower. So it's been added in, and the idea, I have a woman who had been in the Sea Organization for decades and had become, she couldn't work anymore, so they threw her out. She'd given, I think, 2 inheritances to them, and they went and sold her superpower. And they sold her superpower by saying, "You've done the whole bridge. You've done right through to OTE7, I think it would have been at that time, maybe even OT8. And you've done the lists, 10, 11, and 12, things that you were allowed to do at great, incredible expense, these things." She'd done all of that. And they said, "But unfortunately, they'll still catch you in the implant stations when you die. You've got to do superpower." And they sold her £35,000. That's about $45,000. And she hadn't got any money. She borrowed this money fraudulently. And she had to, get new copies of all of the books, which had had a few typos changed in them in the golden era of technology. And Mike, I think, was meant to be, I think he'd got to do 3 books in 6 days or something. And it took Miscavige sort of 7 years to do the whole project. But she'd had to get all of this stuff with this idea of the between lives implants, and it's like, yeah, how silly are we? We've got all of this stuff up in space. We've got the Webb telescope all the way out there. Where are these implant stations? What is this? And it goes back to, I did a thing on history of man with Mike, and it goes back to Hubbard saying, and get this, that Venus has the 4th invader force on it. Now, when I looked it up, I think the median temperature of Venus is 400 degrees centigrade, which is to say 4 times the boiling point of water. So whatever's living there would be, well, there's some bacteria that can live at that temperature, but that's all we know. So there's the 4th invader force. And the 5th invader force are on Mars, which I think has a median temperature of about minus 40 degrees centigrade, which in Fahrenheit is very cold indeed. There's a quick translation, quick calculation. And this is the prison planet. And you hang on a minute, Ron. So they choose to live on Venus and Mars, and they send us to the only habitable planet as prisoners. It's crazy. And then they surround the planet with implant stations, which, none of our satellites have bumped into any of them yet. It's pathetic. And yet £35,000 for this poor old lady who, because of the persistence of one of her daughters who had left, and she rang them up and said, "You give her the money back or I go to the newspapers." And amazingly, she got the money back very quickly. But
well done.
Yeah, but that was the whole superpower thing you were talking about, when they established it in Clearwater.
So they just kept extorting money with this hallucination and delusion that those that had superpower would literally be supermen and superwomen and so on. Well, there have been some
in
catastrophic,
their own minds.
Yes. However, talking about Mike Rinder, he told you he became feisty and fearless, and he rented a helicopter. Airspace doesn't belong. The FAA have rule, but flag did not own the airspace above the. So while David is giving his monologue, and by the way, very, very few people showed up for that. They say 12,000 people live in Clearwater, and there's always 2,000 people getting services at any given time, and there's 1,500 Sea Org members. So I'll calculate how many thousand that is. And maybe 1,500 people showed up for the superpower opening. And so Mike, but they also had a helicopter, a gold helicopter to film their version of it. And through a loudspeaker, a voice came, "Remove yourself from the space." Mike Rinder tells this story to Jeff. He did several podcasts with my husband, Jeffrey Augustine, and he tells us this story, and you just crack up listening to it because the voice commanded that Mike Rinder's helicopter be removed. You are ordered to leave the space. And the pilot said, "Should we leave?" And Mike Rinder said, "What? Go lower down." We're not, you can't be lower than 500 feet. And Mike Rinder guided the helicopter to be almost menacingly over this. And the noise of the helicopter was drowning Miscavige's voice. Oh, God, you can imagine. But this was just a prank. This is in order of Mike, having fun as well.
And the 1,500 Scientologists who'd attended were unable, using their intention and their postulates, to do anything about it.
Right. But they were all looking up instead of focusing on the
Gauleiter.
So Mike was courageous and brave. And he was already being followed around, and boy, there was an unlimited budget to harm him.
Well, they saved $5 million, hadn't they? So they've got to spend it somehow.
Yeah. The $5 million because they could forecast just how much damage he could do.
And he did.
He did.
He did,
When he was interviewed with Brian Seymour, the journalist in Australia, Brian asked him flat out, "How many times did Miscavige assault you, body slam you, hurl you to the ground, punch you, we're talking about heavy duty, it's not a push against the wall, but..."
Oh, yeah. He likes to hurt people.
Yeah. And Mike Rinder spoke up just countless times, over and over and over and over. But since he had been gaslit since he was 6 years old, this was his life. He was saving the planet. And he was indoctrinated to suffer it all in order to help others get the tech. He believed it like I did.
Yeah, I did too.
Were duped. Yeah.
I talked with him. I did, I think, 12, 13 pieces with him. And he talked about this, that in Scientology, as in any authoritarian group, you're taught that whatever goes wrong in your life is your fault. And whatever goes right in your life is because of your membership of the group. And so he talked about, and I, of course, over the years, I've talked with hundreds of people this has happened to. You're thinking, what did I do wrong? How did I pull this in? What's wrong in and then you go, well, look, authoritarianism is very simple. You have a leader who is dominant, and you have the members who are submissive. And the whole thing works. And I'd say whenever you find yourself in a group like that, unless it's military and there might be a a need to follow orders and do things immediately. If you ever find that somebody is dominating you, they're forcing you into submission, then it's time to leave. But Mike it's that peculiar ethical twist that you can take somebody and weaponize them, and call this the weaponized empath. And it was quite evident in the times that I spoke with Mike that he cared about people. He was concerned about the damage he'd done to such an extent that, I mean, he said to me, I just can't keep apologizing. I've apologized, and I really do, stay awake at night worrying about what I did to people. But what has to happen is to go forward and to talk about what this group really is, what it's actually doing to people. And then, through the Aftermath Foundation, this very noble attempt to help people escape from slavery, and that he committed himself to that. And indeed, when I joined Aftermath, and I was briefly last year, I was on the board for about 6 months.
Yes, Mike put you on the board. You're on the board of.
Mike came to me and said, "Look, we're under attack, and will you help out?" And I wanted to make it, I understood what he was being accused of, that there were accusations that he had assisted in the cover-up of child sex abuse. And I went to Miriam Francis, who made those allegations, and I said, "What do you want to know? I'll ask him." And we made a video, and I asked him the questions that she wanted answering, in the kind of hope that people would realize that if you accuse somebody of something like this, they're tainted. It's very difficult from then on, whether they did anything or not.
Yes.
I've known two people, neither of them very well, but I played I did some recording. I'm a drummer. I did some recording with a violinist who was a school teacher, and two boys at the school had accused him of fiddling with them, and it completely destroyed the man. And before it went to court, they both admitted that they'd made this story up. But by that time, I briefly met another guy who was sent to prison because his daughter had made allegations against him, which probably weren't true. I don't think they were, but he spent a year in prison. This is a real. So I kind of went, he's been accused of these things. The only thing I work with is evidence. I know that people have feelings, and they feel certain, they're sure that something must have happened. So I went to Miriam and to Jamie Mustard, who was helping her to write scripts and ask questions and do things, and keeping himself in the background. I asked them both. I said, "What are your questions?" I'll put them to Mike. I put them to Mike. And it was a very difficult situation, because I felt as if I was interrogating him. And these were questions, they're horrible questions, but I asked him the questions and he answered them. He answered them directly, and I believe honestly. And we published that in March 2024. And we both said during that, if you actually do have evidence, report it. And I said, tell Miriam, because she's collecting evidence about this. And Mike said, tell the police. If you know of anything that I've done that is criminal, tell the police. And I think it's safe to say 9 months later, no evidence has come forward. And, I asked him to stand down from Aftermath because there was this assault upon him, which was obviously stressing him out, as of course it would. But he also had cancer.
Yes.
And, so we then got into ridiculous assertions about him pretending to have cancer. And after we published that video, we'd planned actually to do a series on Office of Special Affairs harassment of people, that he was going to talk to me about that, rather than just his biography and what had happened to him. He was going to talk to me about the operations. He saw some of the comments on the video we posted, and he just went, I can't take this. It's too much.
Yes.
And I said, don't read the comments. We've got 400 likes. But it was horrible to see
Yeah. Yeah.
that he had given so much and risked so much, sacrificed so much. And this misunderstanding, it is the problem in any authoritarian cult, that he was doing what he was doing to help people. He harassed people. We only met once while he was still involved. And he came here. You've been to my house, the village I live in. He came
Yes.
here with a retinue. He had Warren McShane with him, and somebody from Lenski and Heller, the lawyers, and they just turned up on my doorstep pretty much and said,
Jeez.
right, we'll sit down, and started offering me money. And the meeting was very short because I said, before we do anything, I'd like to know what your ranks are in the Sea organization. And they refused to tell me. So I said, right, we're done. End of meeting. And but he said later, when we met many years later, he said, you seem like a nice guy and well-intentioned and smart, but I would have destroyed you because you're an obstacle on the road to freedom. You were preventing the liberation of mankind through Scientology. And I kind of go, yeah, I get that. I understand. There's this idea, it's been said, he knew what he was doing. He was harassing people, and people such as yourself who were working in the technology department doing hypnotism, as we call it. Sorry about that. Frauditing, as Captain Bill called it. There's this idea, well, we were doing good. But it's the same thing. Whether you're going out and harassing somebody or you're sitting down and messing their mind up with an e-meter and these hypnotic processes, we thought we were doing good. Mike thought he was doing good. And as soon as he realized he wasn't, and the same was true for me, and the same was definitely true for you as well, as soon as we realized that we'd been doing people harm, we stood up and, did something about it. That needs to be what we understand about Mike, that this incredible courage. I've talked to so many people who were in the harassment department. And of course, regular Scientologists became guardian assistant Scientologists, or, a lot of people were used to harass me, come and knock on my door at 11 o'clock at night and shout at me and stuff. They weren't members of the Guardian's office. They weren't members of the Office of Special Affairs, but they knew that what they were doing was for the survival of humanity. And to be able to overcome that, I talked to a woman who had sex with members of parliament to get information from them. I talked with another woman who had been a secretary to an MP working on freedom of information, reporting back to Scientology. I've talked with lots of people, and not very many of them went public. In fact, apart from McCloughery, Mike's the only one I can think of who was willing to say, this is what I did, this is what happened. I suppose we could put what's his face, Mark Rathbun in that, but I have a bad feeling about Marty that he always seemed like it was about him. It was about him becoming the new leader of Scientology among the independents. So there are three people who stood up and said, we did these things out of 1,000 over the years, So that courage, being willing, and with Mark Rathbun, I never felt that he'd admitted guilt. He still seemed to be determined to destroy Jerry Armstrong, even after he left, and which was odious. But Mike was so different to that. Mike was a caring, kind, loving person. He was friendly. He was open. He could apologize and admit to error. And when you look at what he achieved, the Aftermath shows with Leah Remini, which reached millions of people and
3 seasons.
Yeah, and 3 Emmys. That really changed the picture and allowed, what is happening now, which is, of course, the complete collapse of Scientology. All of the, they survived because people like Trish Duggan pour money in. She claims she's given them $360 million. And you go, well, they need it because they aren't recruiting anybody. They're down to a membership of perhaps 20,000 at most. Here we know it because we have a census every 10 years and you declare your religion. And at the last census, 2021, there were 1,100 Scientologists in the UK. And that means that everybody who had a family member who wasn't really a Scientologist would get them to put it on, and they'd probably get the dog to say it was a member of Scientology. So 1,100 is already an exaggeration. And you're going, but the UK's where the headquarters of Scientology was for all those years. It has that little impact. We had, in the 2011 census, we had more than 200,000 people who said they were Jedi. So I was the only person who put Sith on my form, But so Scientology, is like 5% the size of the Jedi, the fastest growing religion in the world. All of that stuff with, was it 11 million, the highest claim I've seen for membership. It's in collapse. It only survives because of the whales, because of
few handful of whales.
Yeah, and we should do something about that. We should focus on them and make sure that anybody who's paying them money understands that they are funding slavery.
Yes.
That's what they're doing.
Talking about Marty Rothman, in one of his blogs, he wrote how Mike Rinder was summoned by David Miscavige in the middle of the night, when in those days there were pagers. And when your pager went off beeping, you, especially from the dictator. So he went, and Miscavige came out in a white robe. We call it dressing gown in England. They call it robe. Came out in this white robe and gave just a huge punch to Mike Rinder's belly, and Mike Rinder fell to the cement ground. David Miscavige did not say a word. He didn't say what Mike Rinder had done wrong. He didn't. He just gave this one punch, turned around, and walked back to his abode, his bedroom, his suite. And Marty wrote this in one of his blogs. He described the whole thing. I was just flabbergasted at how much physical abuse. Did you know that when Mike Rinder was in the hole, there was a patch of time where nobody was allowed to walk? They had to crawl like dogs on their knees. They had to only crawl round and round. And Mike Rinder says he still has scars. He still had scars on his knees from when you have to crawl on your knees several hours a day, week after week. His knees got bloody, and all of this was happening, the walking on the knee, the crawling on the knees, just before, this was very, very close to his blow. So when he was in England,
his departure, let's not use their word.
yes, escape just before his fleeing. The language that that Miscavige would use, I don't know if I can say it, but it was just constantly, all right. Well, you cocksucker, all you do is suck cock on Hollywood Boulevard, you fucking cocksucker. What have you done now? This kind of language was
13-year-old language from a Philadelphia street tough. Yeah.
Yes. This is mafiosa type language. And then just before Mike fled and escaped, he got a threat from Miscavige saying, "You're fucking up again, you cocksucking son of a bitch. You're going to be banished you're going to be sent to the far reaches of Australia, out in the well, what we would call desert. And
The Great Western Shield.
yes,
Yeah.
and this threat that he would be separated from his 2 kids and Kathy and be banished into the wilderness, this was the final straw. Remember, he'd been crawling on his knees and punched endlessly by Miscavige. It was just, he lived a nightmare. But it precipitated him to take the leap. And then he fled. Did he never tell you about the crawling on the knees?
I don't remember that. Of course, Louis Theroux made a very strange thing called My Scientology Movie, where
Yes.
Mark Rathbun advised him, and they rehearsed the whole and having to clean things with toothbrushes and lick the carpet
Yes.
and all of this stuff. The thing that didn't, and I wasn't very pleased with what they did because it really wasn't coherent. But the thing they didn't do was show how crowded the hole was. That,
Yeah.
you know, in his book, he talks about in A Billion Years, he talks about that there are hundreds of people packed into a double trailer with 2 toilets,
Yeah.
no showers. And some of them, I believe, I mean, Heber was in there, wasn't he?
Yeah. 7 years, 8
7
years.
years, 8 years.
Years.
A prison, a gulag.
Yes.
And you're kind of
Yeah.
going, "But what is it about, you know, the law in the United States that you can get away with this kind of practice? This is appalling that modern slavery is just upheld. It's just permitted. It's absolutely dreadful." Yeah. I mean, the condition with his knees, it's here called housemaid's knee, which is hopefully sometime since that was a normal practice, but it was something that maids would get because they were constantly on their knees scrubbing things and doing what they were ordered to do. But yeah, such valor.
Many dictators have done bad things, but I'm hard-pressed to find someone as cruel and sadistic as Miscavige has been to his lieutenants, to his immediate juniors. It's just horrible. He did the same to Mark Yeager over and over, used him as a punching bag, and he punished Guillaume Le Cerf like this is a maniac. And Scientology, even if a little bit trickles out, the defense is, well, that may be just off policy. That wasn't, Hubbard didn't really, Miscavige is just hot-tempered. It's all watered down and justified. Oh, but that's not policy. He just had a temper tantrum, blah, blah. Whereas Mike Rinder redeemed himself. He just truly, I love some of the things you said. By the way, he was very upset with Miriam Francis. We discussed it at great length on a phone call. He would spend an hour at a time with Miriam on the phone. He did give her, contrary to what she said, he discussed one-on-one with her. They reviewed it. They went on. I don't know what Jamie Mustard said to, but it was disheartening for him that people he tried to help that turned against him.
Yeah.
That was
know that feeling. I really do know that feeling.
Oh,
it's heartbreaking. And the Sufi Halaj said that when your enemies throw stones at you, it doesn't hurt. They're your enemies. But when your friends throw even a flower at you, it really hurts. And it's that point where, she had flown over from Australia to be on the Aftermath show. And when they found out, they didn't understand just how bad it had been. And so it was, well, we'll call the police. And they closed the set. And you know, closing down a set is a cost of tens of thousands of dollars. And they did that. They got the police there, filed a proper report so that her father could be found and extradited to Australia. And I think Mike felt almost paternal towards her, that he really went out of his way to try and help. And I do understand. I don't bear any grudge against Miriam. She was abused. And I'll tell this story. I've been wondering whether I should make this public, but I will now. I was approached by Jamie Mustard in October of 2023. He told me he had never told his story. He was a best-selling author. He'd written a book about PR, and he'd written a book about this treatment of putting anesthetic into your stellate ganglia to overcome PTSD, which is used by the US military, not by the Navy, only by the Army. And there are profound questions about it, and the confusion between post-traumatic stress disorder that you get in combat and post-traumatic stress disorder that is complex, which is to say you get from slavery, from being a slave. They have the same symptoms, but this technique, as far as I could check, and I think Jeffrey checked this too, we couldn't find any use of it for complex PTSD. So different condition. But Jamie was selling this thing, and he came to me and said, I'm going to come on your show and I'm going to say, I grew up in East LA in Scientology. And, you know, he was horribly abused from birth and through his childhood, as were all of the children in the Sea Org, Cadet Org, nursery, what have you. I've talked to quite a number. There were, of course, hundreds and hundreds of people who went through this terrible treatment. And he has every right to be outraged at what happened to him. He said, I'll tell the story. So he did. I sort of said, look, I'd like some evidence that this treatment, this complex PTSD treatment on the stellate ganglia, that it's effective on complex PTSD. I read 4 papers about combat PTSD. I think Jeffrey told me he'd read 10. And it was very interesting. I learned a great deal about PTSD that I didn't know. But there was nothing to support the usefulness of this technique. We kept talking. We had 10 phone conversations, Zoom conversations rather, amounting to about 20 hours. And I was deeply concerned. The last couple of conversations, we both lost our tempers, and I don't lose my temper. You've known me for years. I don't. And I just felt so needled, partly because the same sentences were repeated in the conversations. So one of them was that he could compare Mike Rinder to Mengele, the angel of death, as he was called at Auschwitz, who decided who was killed immediately and who went to the workforce. But that would be too much. But it was more like he was going to compare him to Wernher von Braun, who, of course, headed NASA and developed the V1 and V2 rockets using Jewish slave labor and was never tried at Nuremberg. And I'm kind of sat there going, Mike Rinder, Wernher von Braun, Mengele, this is a little bit strong. He repeated the same statement to me. And it was then when I talked with Jeffrey, he'd said it to him as well. Then I talked with Steve Hassan, he'd said it to him as well. So it's a script. Yeah. That worried me. In our last but one conversation, Miriam Francis called him while we were talking. So I had a conversation with both of them. And he'd just told me that she'd called Mike Rinder with 12, I think it was 12 questions, 9 of which he'd written. Okay. And the last question was the trick question, and he was going to get Mike. And he just kept, call after call, he just escalated that he wanted me to do something to harm Mike Rinder. I'm going, if you give me evidence of him covering up any, child sexual abuse, then I will make that public. If there is evidence, I will do that because I won't stand for that. But I will not do it based upon speculation and circumstantial evidence. Now, so he's told me that he wrote 9 of the 12 questions. The 12th question was meant to trip Mike up. Hypnotists call it a yes set. You ask 11 questions where the answer is yes. And then the last one is, do you want to buy this car? And then people will often say, yes, you can trick people into complying with what you want. Mike got to the last question and went, it's a bit strange. And he then emailed Miriam and said, did you record the conversation? I talked to them 2 days after that had happened. And they were pleased. They were going to let him stew in this. And I think he then got Ford Green involved to write something for him, which is not a great idea, I don't think. But we won't get into that topic. They were kind of gloating about this. And I'm kind of going, all right, what are the questions? What do you want him to answer about, her mother and about what had happened to her, the terrible things that had happened to her? And it was just this strange feeling that there was this guy sat behind Miriam in secret who was starting to run an independent OSA. And that's what we've seen. He was supporting Aaron Smith-Levin. And he was, after Matthew's finished, Aaron has got the audience. Aaron's new foundation will be great. And Aaron's foundation will send people to get the fix in the stellate ganglia. That was the route. And Aaron raised money for Miriam, or Aaron, I think, was part of raising money for Miriam to go and do it. Though he himself told me that he didn't believe in the treatment when I talked with them. And I've got no axe to grind with Aaron. I'm not interested in getting into any fight. He has done a great deal to publicize the wrongs of Scientology, and that much I admire. But Jamie was, and he said all sorts of, bizarre things. He said that Aaron was recruiting a board of goofballs and jerks so that he could get done what he wanted to be done. And it was just, I don't know. I have refrained from speaking about this, but it seems proper now that, Miriam should be helped in every way possible. Jamie should be helped in every way possible. But it's important to know that there are people trying to work in the background who have malign intent, that they want to do harm. And they have done harm. The unity of the ex-Scientology community has been completely fractured as a consequence of deliberate activity.
I find it hard to swallow how some of his friends could have turned so much against him. I find that Mike, we have to acknowledge that he put on an international show on A&E, 12 to 15 episodes per season, 3 seasons.
Yeah.
He and Leah just changed the landscape of how Scientology is viewed.
Yeah.
So there was the aftermath, and then he wrote a book. Simon & Schuster is looked at as a noble publisher in New York. It's just the cream of the crop. It's an aristocratic blue blood publisher. They took the book. The New York Times reviewed the book, and they have a subsidiary, I forget the actual name, Glaston Publishing or whatever, some subsidiary. Anyway, in the advertising of A Billion Years, Mike Rinder's book, all the ads were placed side by side with King Charles's biography. I don't know if it was authorized or whatever, but it was so fun to see. He was Prince Charles at the time, but now he's king, side by side with A Billion Years. It seems so elevated to be that. And the book was so good that he wrote the book before he passed.
Yeah.
That's why your books see, John, long after you're dead and gone, I'm dead and gone.
I'm not intending to be dead and gone. Where does this idea come from?
Death and taxes, the two certainties of
Death in Texas.
But anyway, taxes.
Sorry.
Yeah, death and taxes, the two certainties of. But anyway, what I'm just trying to say is the book lives on. It has a voice of its own. Your books will live on in perpetuity, have no shelf life expiration at all.
No.
Sometimes a book is only acknowledged long after the author passed. Look at Shakespeare. He's a textbook in most schools, and he's been gone 400 years, 500 years. Anyway, Mike Rinder's legacy, his book, his shows, and especially what he did with people one-on-one. He definitely left an unforgettable legacy. John, thank you so much for having us reminisce about him. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Think and I really liked I really loved some of the special anecdotes you gave.
Yeah.
I'm glad we took a full hour or more to reminisce on it rather than a blurb. Yeah.
He did explain to me that the reason that in 94 and 95, whenever it was we met, that he didn't get around to destroying me was that he was so excited that he was in Nottingham and he could go to Trent Bridge cricket ground. So his attention was divided, you know. Bless him, a wonderful man. And,
yeah, wonderful man. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. Thank you to everybody who's watched, and please reflect kindly in the comments below on the life of this remarkable man who was captured as a child, enslaved as a teenager, convinced by Ron Hubbard, who was a screaming maniac, to save the world, he'd got to do these things, and put into a position where he was, you know, like a Nazi Gauleiter. He was running this thing, that he realized that he was able to overcome that, and that he spent so many years and so much effort and gave so much dedication to helping people that he met along the way, but also to helping tens of thousands of people he would never meet, and tens of thousands of people who will never join Scientology because of what he, you know, particularly what he did with Leah, you know, has made it impossible for Scientology to recruit anymore, thankfully. So yes, thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, everybody who's watched.
And warmest condolences to Chris.
Yes, our condolences
to Christy. And his beloved sons, and very close people like Claire Headley and Mark. And Leah, especially. Leah wrote a heartfelt thing today of how what a big loss. It's a loss, but he left a legacy. He's a story of resilience and triumph. Thank you, John. Thanks a million.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.